Scarface 1920. It's a 1 to 4 player game where each single player is going to take on the role of one of the famous gangs from the 1920s Prohibition era. Can you lead your gang to become the most wealthiest in Chicago? Well, learn how to play the game after the break. Now, if you have any comments, questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I will do my best to get to them as quickly as I can. Also, feel free to email me, off-the-shelf board game reviews. That is otsbgr@gmail.com. I do my best to answer those emails as quick as I can. If you enjoy the content and you enjoy the videos I put out there, think about supporting the channel on Patreon. Just $1 in tip jar is a great way to say thanks. Remember, this channel is 100% sponsor-free, which means I don't have influences, but that does mean all these costs do come out of my pocketbook. You can say thank you by tossing $1 in the tip jar, or just clicking those two buttons down below. It's super easy. Click the like, click the subscribe, and then YouTube will do the rest. Remember, like and subscribe. Let's go ahead and get things started with how to play this game of Scarface 1920.
The first thing you need to do when you're setting up the game is you're going to need to shuffle all the raid cards in the game. Once the raid cards have all been shuffled, you can place them over the raid section of the board. Next thing we want to do is we want to shuffle up all the job cards. Now the job cards will get their own little section of the board right over here. And next thing we need to do is we need to take care of the dealer deck of cards. But before we do that, every single player needs to get the basic starting dealers that will come with every single one of the gangs. Now I highly suggest that when you're putting the game away, you put the basic starting dealers with every one of the gangs, because this game does come with some great fantastic trays that allows you to keep track of all the components. But the first deal that every single player is going to get is a gun supplier, and every single player is going to get an alcohol supplier. Now if you look at the lower right hand corner, every single one of these cards, they are numbered 1 through, well, however many dealers are in the game. But we're looking at basically cards numbers 1 through 8. There's 4 copies of the gun supplier, 4 copies of the alcohol supplier. Every single player is going to get 1 of the gun suppliers, and every single player is going to get 1 of the alcohol suppliers. They're going to put every one of these with their board, with the rest of their stuff, such as their thugs, their gang board, their starting cards, and all of their deck and their board set up. But we'll go ahead and cover how all that stuff works in just a moment. Let's go ahead and finish with the dealers. Once we remove those 8 cards, we're going to take the rest of the dealer cards, we're going to shuffle them all up, and we're going to place them on the dealer section of the board right there. Next up, we need to organize all of the associates that all of the players can hire to add to their gang to help them reach their nefarious ends. Now there are 2 sets of associates that the players can hire. They can hire 1 through 3 star associates, and they can also hire 4 and 5 star associates. Go through all the decks of cards with all the associates, get all the 1 through 3 stars, put them in one single deck, go through all the 4 and 5, make sure they're also in their own separate deck. Once we've done that, we're going to shuffle each one of these individual decks separately, and then we're going to lay them on their individual spaces. The 1 to 3 star for the 1 to 3 star associates, the 4 to 5 star for all the 4 to 5 star associates. After we've done so, we're going to draw the top 3 1 to 3 associates. We're going to draw the top of the 4 to 5 associates, and then additionally, we're going to draw 1 more card from each one of the individual decks and place it on top. What this means is that there's going to be 2 4 to 5 associates and 4 1 to 3 star associates available for our players every single round to go ahead and purchase and add to their nefarious gang. Next up, we're going to place Elliot Ness on the starting place for him on the crime track. Now we'll cover the crime track later, but basically the crime track represents just how nefarious and how notorious your criminal gang happens to be. The more notorious you are, the higher you go up on the crime rate, but also don't forget that Elliot Ness himself is continuing to also grow on this track. It's going to be very important. I'll explain to you that when we get to that point, but Elliot Ness goes right there on the crime track. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the police officers to the board, but we're going to come back to that in a little bit because I want to leave the cards out here so you can see them, but do understand we are going to come back and place the police officers out. And they actually go out at this point, but again, we're skipping ahead for reasons of, teaching you how to play the game. Now, every single player is going to get a starting hand of cards, which is going to be matching their starting gang. Now, the interesting thing about this game is this game does have for a little bit of a symmetry because every single gang does have different powers, different abilities, and they're going to play a little bit differently. Now, they each have their own little bit of strengths. That doesn't mean you can't play against those strengths, but if you play those strengths at the right times, it can be a very opportune way to gain some extra victory points. I'll cover a little bit of those when I talk about the review. That's not going to be what this tutorial video is going to be all about, so it's going to move beyond that. But to make sure, the thing that we need to understand here is that every single player is going to get a deck of 10 cards. They're going to get their boss card, which represents the boss for their specific game. They're going to get 2 lieutenant cards. They're going to get 3 bodyguards, and they're going to get 4 unique cards. Now, the important thing about this is the bottom of every one of these 4 unique cards these are your right hands. The way to tell who your right hands are is they're going to have a little hat symbol on the bottom of the cards. The rest of your starting cards do not have those symbols. Basically, what we need to do is we need to separate the 4 right-hand cards, place them next to our player board, and make sure that we don't shuffle them in as our starting hands. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our boss, our 2 lieutenants, and then our 3 bodyguards, and we're going to take all of these cards and we are going to shuffle these together, and these are going to be our draw pile that we're going to have access to at the start of the game. It's very important that we actually know that we only have 6 cards to form our starting hand. But let's go back to setting up the actual board for the game itself. So let's go ahead and handle our police officers that we skipped just a moment ago to talk about our hand of cards. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to place 1 police officer in the far south side. We're going to place 1 police officer in the far north side. And then finally, 1 police officer is going to start in the central area of the game. Now, these police officers will move around. They do offer penalties to our players that they have to be present. And then we can definitely abuse them to make them a thorn in the side of our opponents when we're trying to gain control of all of Chicago. Next up, we're going to seed the city of Chicago with the starting neighborhoods that we're going to have at the start of this game. Now, the game does come with multiple neighborhoods, more neighborhoods than you'll ever use in every single game. And every one of these neighborhoods do offer different benefits, and they're going to change a little bit of the flow of the game. Every one of these cards is going to be double-sided. One side is the day side, and one side is going to be the night side. The night side has higher rewards, but also higher requirements to get those rewards. So simply go through an entire deck of neighborhoods, make sure you have all of them facing face up, shuffle them together just a little bit, and we're going to place out these neighborhoods based on the current player count. Now, if we happen to be playing a 2-player game, we're going to notice that we're going to get 2 neighborhoods in the central district, and every one of the other 6 districts, there's a total of 7 on the board, is going to get 1 of these neighborhoods. We're playing a 3-player game. We're going to place 3 of these neighborhoods in the central district itself. And then every single other district is going to get 1 neighborhood only. And then finally, if we're playing a 4-player game, we're going to place 2 of these neighborhoods in the central district. We're going to put 2 in far south. We're going to put 2 in far north. And then every other single district is going to get 1 neighborhood only. Whatever neighborhoods we don't use in this game, we're simply going to take them, remove them from the game, because they will not be used once we have our starting setup for the game. So basically, based on player count, that's going to judge exactly how many neighborhoods happen to be in every single district and the total amount of neighborhoods available in every single game. Now, for simplicity's sake, I'm going to show you in this tutorial video how to play the game as a 2-player game. So you see the setup I have right here is for a 2-player game with 2 in central and 1 neighborhood in every other single district. Now let's cover this important distinction really quick. I'll repeat it later, but just want to make sure it's very important for you to understand. Neighborhoods are the tiles. Districts are the ones separated by the lines themselves. Now, if we use the terms adjacent and next to, that's where it becomes a little bit confusing. So we'll cover those terms a little bit later in the video, but just understand that those are very, very important terms. We have neighborhoods, we have districts, we have next to, and we have adjacent. We'll cover all that in just a little bit. Now that we got all of our neighborhoods, we need to put some interesting things out there, such as businesses for all of our players to be competing for. Every single one of these neighborhoods gets to get 1 business. There are 4 different businesses available in the game, but one of the 4, which is nightclubs, is only available through player upgrades on our player board. So we're basically looking at 3 businesses at the start of the game. We have our speakeasies, we have our brothels, and then we have our casinos. Every single neighborhood is randomly going to get 1 of these. Now, there's a couple different ways to do it. Throw them all in a bag and just basically go as you draw. I prefer to make sure that we get a couple of every single business. It kind of helps with some of the jobs, especially since some jobs require specific businesses to be in play. And I don't want one player to get kind of cheated in the game if the businesses they need are not represented enough on the board. So to do that, to prevent that from happening, I kind of make it a little bit more even. So since we have a total of 8 neighborhoods out there, I'm going to make sure that I have at least 3 of one business, 3 of another business, and then 2 of a final business. Just make sure I have a nice even spread for a total of 8 neighborhoods, and now I have a total of 8 businesses. I feel it makes things a little bit fair. Of course, if you just want to follow the rules as written, you can end up getting a whole bunch of brothels, a whole bunch of casinos, or just missing out on something. Again, this is your choice. This is just something I do because I think it adds a little bit to the fairness. Anyways, after we've done this, we're simply going to add 1 business to every single one of these neighborhoods. And when you're done, all of your neighborhoods should look just like this. Next up, we need to put the time tracker on the time track based on the current player count. Now, for a 4-player game, time tracker will go here. 3-player game and 1 to 2-player game, it'll go right here. Now, you're probably noticing already right here that it does say 1 to 2-player game. In this video, I'm not going to cover the solo rules at all. I'm going to cover the solo rules in a completely separate video where I'm actually going to show you how to play the solo game, and then I'm going to play a solo game itself in a video. It's probably a little bit longer of a video, but I want people to learn how to play the basic game before you learn how to play the solo. I think it's very important and a better way to learn how to play the game itself. But the important thing to understand is this time track is right here. The time marker will never go beyond the current player count for the game. Also, do know that the solo rules is actually an AI, which means you can actually play with the AI in a lower player count game. So for example, you can play a 2-player game and add in the AI to make it a 3-player game. So when we're talking about the player count, we're talking about the total amount of players in the game. So if you are using an AI in a 2-human game, that makes it a 3-player game. So make sure you put the time tracker on the 3-player, and if you have 3 humans, 1 AI, that will be a 4-player game. There's no way to make this a 5-player game with 4 humans and 1 AI, at least not yet, but hopefully there'll be an expansion that does make this a 5-player game eventually, because it's something I'm definitely looking forward to. But again, back to our example, we're playing a 2-player game, so we put the time marker on the 2-player count. Next up, we need to go ahead and set our news that is going to be the news that we could use, because this is the news in the 1920s. So we're going to get a deck of cards that has all the news that's available. There's 2 cards we need to pull out. That's the starting card and the ending card. So the very first starting card is going to be the U.S. is voted dry, which signifies the beginning of Prohibition. Additionally, we're going to have the Prohibition ends at last card, and we're going to take this card and we're going to place it face down in the future news. Future news, and this is the current news spot. Current news will be referenced once in a while during the game, so just make sure you know the difference. After we've done that, we're going to take all the news cards that are available in the game and notice how many news cards there are. Well, we're not going to use all these news cards. We're going to shuffle these up very, very well. And again, this does add a lot to the replay of the game. We're going to take 2 of these news cards and we're going to place them down on top of the face down Prohibition ends card. And the rest of these news cards, we're going to remove from the game. Now, yes, I know you may be asking, can we use the news cards to extend the length of the game? Yes, you can. It needs to be a decision you make as the players across the board, but the basic rules do say that we're going to play the game with 2 news cards for a total of 3 news cards, adjusting the amount of rounds that will be available in this game. Now that we have the board set up, the only thing left to do is the individual player setup, but before we do that, we need to figure out who's going to be the starting player. Now the rules say to pick whoever watched the most recent gangster movie as the one who's going to be the first player, or read the most recent gangster book, or you have pistols at noon, or no, I may have made that up. Just find a nice gentlemanly way to figure out who is going to be the first player and go from there. And now we have the setup for every single one of the individual players, because every single player is going to get their own individual player board. Every single player gets their own player board, and they're going to get all the components that go with their gang. Now, every single player is going to get their gang with all 12 of their miniatures, a player board, their boss card, their tokens. We're going to track the advancing of the skills, their starting deck of cards. Don't forget at the beginning of the video how I explained how to separate that starting deck of cards. It's very, very important. And additionally, players are also going to get job cards. So once a player has picked their gang and grabbed all the components that go with their gang, do not forget, I just want to emphasize this one more time, this is an asymmetric game. Every single gang does have different powers. And the powers are generally based on your gang leader. Every single gang leader has 4 special skills that are unique to that gang leader, which means that every one of these gangs do play it a little bit differently, because every time that gang leader's card does come up in your hand, it gives you access to I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just say it gives you access to a potential 4 skills. It's very important, so make sure you take a time to figure out how you want to pick your gangs, because different gangs do lend to different play styles. Some gangs are a little bit more aggressive, some are more all about the alliances, so it's very important to pick a gang that fits your play style, or try something different. The first thing you do once you select your gang is you need to make sure you put your gang boss on the gang boss starting slot on your gang board, and then you're going to put all 12 of the cubes inside every one of the 12 different slots. These are representing your advancing skills, the advancing statistics of your gang leader, and also different benefits once you uncover these cubes. These cubes are going to be moved from this section all the way over to this section, which is where you're going to get the advancement, the more powerful level of your gang, and the ability to level up the various different 6 gang statistics that your gang does have. Next up, you're going to take your gang board right here, which allows you to place all 12 of your gangs out there on the board. Make sure you put your thugs out on the board correctly. You're going to put 6 of them in the slums. You're going to put 2 of them in the safe house. And you can put 4 of them over there in your headquarters. Now there's 3 different slots. This is very, very important to make sure you understand that gang thugs that are in your headquarters are available for use. The ones in your safe house and the ones in your slums are the ones who have taken various levels of injuries, and they're not available to place on the board until they make it back to the headquarters. Next thing you need to do is make sure you take $10 and place it behind your gang board. Now remember, the money in this game is an unknown by all of your opponents. You're going to keep your money behind your board at all times, and you're never allowed to tell another player how much money you have. You can't use it for table talk, you can't use it for influences, you can't use it for threats. No other player is allowed to know how much money you have behind your gang board. Keep your money amount hidden. It's very important to the rules. Next thing you do is make sure you put out your control tokens right to the side of your board. This is represented by the various different apartment buildings. You should have 7 of them. You start with 2 trucks and you should start with 3 cars. Now the trucks and the cars have different abilities and different benefits set to them. We'll explain that when we get to that point. Next thing we need to do is we need to take our crime rate tracker right here and place it on level 1. Every single player starts with a crime rate tracker on level 1, and that will continue to raise as we do various different nefarious actions, such as heading to the criminal underworld. Now it's time to form your starting hand of cards. Remember, remove your 4 right-handed men from your starting 10 cards. Take your remaining 6 cards, which includes your boss card, your 2 lieutenants, and your 6 body cards. We're going to take all 6 of these cards that are right here. We're going to shuffle up that deck of cards, and then we're going to draw our starting hand of 3 cards. The important thing to understand here is that your right-hand men will be added to your board at later times once we unlock certain skill levels, which allow us to add one of these cards into our hand, continuing to build the power of our hand. Additionally, there is a game variant, and I'm not going to cover any of the game variants. There's a page towards the end of the rulebook, which has 2 wonderful gameplay variants. I'll cover them all the way at the end of the video here. Just not going to take care of them right now, but do understand there are ways to go ahead and modify your starting deck of cards. It is one of the game variants available. Now, starting in reverse player order with the last player, every single player is going to choose one district that they are going to gain control of at the start of the game. And the way we're simply going to do this is every single player looks at one of the starting districts out here, and we're going to pick a neighborhood that we are going to start with control of. And the way we're going to do this is the first thing we're going to do is we need to find a neighborhood that does not currently have a police officer in it, or a neighborhood that does not currently have an opponent's control marker in it. So if you're the first person to do this, well, you have lots of options. And if you're the last person to do this, well, you're down to one option, basically. So in this 2-player game, the way this is going to work is we're going to start with a Black Wolves gang because they're going to be player 2 in player order in this specific game we're picking. Capone is going to be player number 1. So starting with a Black Wolves gang, we're going to go ahead and pick a neighborhood that does not currently have a control marker. Can't happen because we're the first to select, and does not actively have a police car currently in that district. Once we've selected that, we're either going to place one of our trucks or we're going to place one of our cars in this neighborhood. Now, there's various different reasons why we would pick specific neighborhoods. I'm not going to cover strategies and tactics in this game. I'm going to leave that up to you to go ahead and discover. But just for simplicity's sake, we're going to take our truck, we're going to place it in this neighborhood right here. The next thing we are going to do is we're going to take one of our control markers and we're going to place it right here on top of that neighborhood, signifying that we have control of this neighborhood. Once the Black Wolves have finished that part, it's now up to the Capone player to do the exact same thing. So the Capone player is going to pick one neighborhood. We're going to take our car in there. Again, there's various different reasons why we may want to do this. And then we're going to take control of it by placing one of our control markers on top of the neighborhood, signifying that we have control. Next up, every single player is dealt 3 job cards, and these job cards are dealt to every single player face down. I'm simply placing them face up just for simplicity because I want to show you something very important. There are 2 kinds of job cards in the game. There's permanents and they are instants. We'll explain why that's very important when we explain the job cards themselves, but just understand every single player gets 3 of them. We're going to place them face down and they're going to be left face down until we complete those jobs. Just like our money, we're never allowed to share with other players what jobs we have and what jobs we're working on. There's also a game variant where you can choose through a drafting system which jobs you're going to start with. Don't worry about it when you're learning the game because there's so many jobs available to the game as it is anyways. It's only going to slow down the setup process. First couple times you play, don't worry about that variant. But in the later games, it's a wonderful variant to throw in. Finally, every single player is dealt their starting gun and their starting alcohol supplier. I explained that earlier in the video, how we find those cards and why we have those. Every single player should probably have one of those in their starting box of components anyway, but just make sure every single player starts with one alcohol supplier and one single gun supplier. And now we come to our first individual choice that every single gang needs to make. Every single player needs to decide what their starting resources are going to be. Every single player gets 2 starting resources among the guns and the alcohol. And you can pick one of each, or you can pick 2 of one if you like. Now, there's various different strategic reasons why you may want to do so. A lot of those strategies are going to coincide with exactly what neighborhoods you may have picked at the start of the game. But basically, just for simplicity, I'm just going to take 1 gun and I'm going to take 1 alcohol barrel for our Black Wolves gang. And then you're simply going to put one of every single one of those resources currently on each one of the dealers. Now, I'll explain how the dealers work a little bit later, but do note that right here, this number right here is the maximum amount of resources that dealer can hold on it. So in this case, we see that our gun dealer can hold one resource, not one gun, very important, one resource. And our alcohol dealer can also hold one resource, not one alcohol resource. That's very important. It can hold one of any resource at all. So I can mix those up if I want. But just for simplicity and just to make things easy, I'm putting one gun and one alcohol in each one of them because that's the max each one of those dealers can hold on to. Good news, you made it through setup. Now let's explain how to play the game. But before we explain how to play the game, let's go ahead and cover some of the components, because how these components work, what they do, and how we're going to use all these components is a wonderful way to explain how to play the game. Because quite honestly, like most of your area control and your deck building games, if you've played games like this before, a lot of these mechanics are going to make sense. It's how the cards interact and what they do, which is going to cause the difficulties. Because quite honestly, the game flow is pretty much this. On your turn, you're going to gain resources. Those resources are influence and or muscle. You can use those resources of influence and muscle to perform any one of the 15 actions that are available in the game. Then you're going to discard your cards. Possibly during that time, you may activate some jobs. Possibly during that time, you may use some of your skills. You may or may not. That's your choice. You're going to discard your cards. Then you're going to end your turn. Next player gets to take their turn while you're drawing your new hand of cards based on your current gang size that allows you to draw up to your total hand size. That's it. That's how simple the game is. It's how all this interacts, which adds to the complexity and the multiple layers of this game. So let's go on and cover how all these components work. So if you've ever seen a gang move of any kind in your entire life, you know the concept of the ring. So let's go on and cover that right now. There is a component of the game called the ring. The ring is basically unowned by any player in the game until one player manages to hire an associate. When one player hires an associate, they immediately take the ring from whoever has it, even if the ring is currently not controlled by any player. This is very, very important because at the start of your turn, if you still control the ring at the start of your turn, you're going to get a certain amount of money based on the player count. Now, the amount of money you're going to get is based on a 2, 3, or 4 player count, and it's going to be $1, $2, or $3. That's basically the amount of players in the game minus 1. So in a 2-player game, if you start your turn with the ring, you're going to start every single round with $1. This is very important. It doesn't matter if it's an action round or a reorganization round. Every single time you start the round, your turn with the ring, you're going to gain that amount of dollars. So it behooves the other players to try to take the ring away from you before it gets back to your turn, because it's a very simple way to earn money. And again, money is what the game is all about. And if I have not made it infinitely clear yet, the winner of the game is the person who has the most amount of money in the game at the end of the game. Whether it's the money you get from doing your deals or money from having businesses or other various different bonuses, again, whoever has the most amount of money is the winner at the end of the game. Now, I already mentioned that you gain the ring by hiring associates, but what exactly are associates? Well, the associate cards are cards that you're going to buy and add to your hand to your cards, but beyond that, the associate cards effectively are pretty much exactly the same as your starting hand of gang cards. It's just that associate cards are generally much more powerful. So once these associate cards go into your hand, they're effectively the same thing as your gang cards. So you have your starting hand of 6 gang cards plus your right-hand men that could eventually end up in your hand, plus these associate cards are also going to eventually end up in your hand of cards. So effectively and mechanically, there's not much difference between them. So instead of talking about the gang cards and the associate cards, I'm just going to explain to you how the associate cards work themselves, because they're the ones you need to purchase. Those are the ones you're going to add to your hand to go ahead and increase your powers, your skills, and your influence across Chicago. Every single associate card is going to have a statistic on the upper left-hand corner, which is going to be the amount of resources that card provides once you play that card as part of your plan. Now, the plan is very important when we get to the action phase, but let's just remember for right now, this is going to be the amount of resources. This BAM symbol is the amount of muscle this card produces, and this handshake symbol is the amount of influence this card produces. So once this card is part of your plan, it's going to give you 2 muscle and 2 influence. So if you play multiple cards, they're going to give you multiple amounts of this. So for example, if I happen to play these 2 cards together as part of my plan, I would gain a total of 2 muscle from each for a total of 4 muscle, and a total of 2 influence from each for a total of 4 influence total. So during my turn, I would have that much resource to use to do various such as things such as acts and actions across the board itself. Additionally, every single card is going to have a skill on it and a chain skill available to it. Now, the skills can be used at any time during your turn, just as long as you remember that they cannot be used to interrupt another action. So I can do skills at any time, but I can't interrupt any other actions, such as actions I'm taking or anything I'm doing or jobs. Nice thing about your turn when you play the game is you can do skills, job abilities, and also taking your actions. but none of those can interrupt each other. Additionally, you're going to notice that some of these skills have a prerequisite saying that if you played a card as part of your job plan this turn, and any one of those cards has that symbol in the upper right hand corner, you're also going to get that additional benefit. So let's go ahead and look at this cards down here. We see that if I play these two cards together, this one says that if I play another card with this symbol, I'm going to get this additional skill benefit. But if we look at this card right down here, it says it requires this symbol to go ahead and get that additional skill benefit. So if I play these two cards together, this card would get the benefit from this card, but this card does not get any additional benefits because it does not have that symbol from a different additional card. There's multiple different symbols we can see that are all throughout the game, and all these different symbols will go ahead and feed off of each other. Just understand that if that symbol is not present as part of your plan, it's not going to activate. Doesn't mean that symbol can be in your hand. It has to actually be part of your plan. And that's very important because the more cards you play during the action phase, the higher your crime rate goes up. We'll explain how that works when we get to that point. Next up is our thug board. Now, every one of our players starts with a thug board, and there's a nice reminder on the bottom of the thug board for your starting resources every time you play the game. For the start of the game, you start with 6 thugs in your slums, 2 in your safe house, and 4 that happen to be in your headquarters. Now, this is very, very important. Only thugs that happen to be in your headquarters are able to take actions. Thugs that are in your safe house and your slums, you cannot use for actions at all. And the way thugs are going to end up going to those various different locations is anytime one of your thugs takes a hit, they're going to end up going to a safe house. Anytime one of your thugs is killed, they're going to go to a slum. Anytime an action says just to take your thugs back to your board, they're simply going to return to your headquarters. So just understand there's 3 various different locations that thugs can be. Only the thugs in your headquarters are available for you to use to take your actions. Don't worry, there's ways to go ahead and hire these, move them from the slums to the safe houses and back to the headquarters for their use. But if they're not at the headquarters, you don't have access to them. Next up, we have our dealer cards. Now, our dealers are where we're going to go to make contacts and contracts to go ahead and get with the resources we need to sell in the neighborhoods to go ahead and make the money. Now, every one of these dealer cards has a certain amount of statistics on them, and they're very, very important. The first thing you're going to see in the upper left-hand corner is how many thugs can be sent to that card at any one time. Once there's that limit of thugs on that card, you cannot send any more dealers to that specific card to make any more deals anymore. And you're going to see that's going to be generally a number on the left-hand corner. That's going to be a number 1. And once a thug is there, it pretty much prevents any other thugs from being sent to that deal to go ahead and gain any of the resources. Additionally, every one of these dealer cards is also going to give you a name. It's going to tell you which kind of resource you need to spend once you send a thug there to go ahead and gain a certain amount of resources. Now, there's different amounts of resources we can get, whether it happens to be guns or it happens to be alcohol. There's different symbols that we may see. For example, if we see a slash and a number in, or a slash with some symbols in parentheses, that means we're going to pick a total of 2 among those kind of resources. Otherwise, we may see a number in a specific resource, and that's the amount of resources that dealer is going to provide every single time you visit them. So if I go to the gin distiller, I can get 2 alcohol, I get 2 guns, or I get 1 of each. Or as opposed, if I go to the brewery owner, I'm going to get 2 alcohol every single time I visit them. There's a whole bunch of dealer cards available. They all have different amounts of resources that are available to them. And the amount of resources it takes every time you visit them is going to be listed on the bottom of the card. As another example, the moonshiner says every time you go to them, you either need to have 1 muscle or 1 influence after sending your thug there to go ahead and get 2 alcohol from that dealer. Additionally, every one of these cards is going to have a number in the upper right-hand corner of it, anywhere from 0 to 3. That's the amount of resources that you can store on that specific dealer. Again, that's not the amount of resources it produces. Those are the amount of resources that you can store on a specific dealer. For example, a gin distiller, you can't store any resources on them at all. It's going to be really important when we talk about attacking opponents' neighborhoods. But do note that the moonshiners, as another example, they can store up to 3 resources in a combination of guns or alcohol. It's all up to how we want to store our resources on those individual dealers. Next up, we have our police officers. Now, there's 3 police officers in the game, and the police officers are always on the board. There is no way to remove them from the board. There's always a total of 3 police officers on the board at any single time. Now, the police officers are basically going to be used to be a thorn in the other player's side, and you can move them across the board by spending skills and various different actions that allow you to move the police officers. Now, anytime you're allowed to move a police officer, you move 1 police officer from one district to any other district on the board. You don't have to move adjacent. They basically can go to any one of the boards you want them to go. Once they happen to be in a specific district, they're going to cause different penalties to anybody who does actions in that specific district. And the penalties are going to be compounded if we manage to get multiple police officers sent to the same district. Matter of fact, that's going to multiply the amount of penalties in a very great way, helping you and very much hindering your other opponents. Police officers in a district add 2 effects to the district when they happen to be there. The first thing they're going to do is the effect of bribery. When a player comes out and places an order, a job, or a skill that causes a thug or a vehicle to enter that specific district that happens to be shared with the other police officers, that player must spend $2 per police officer that happens to be in the district. So for example, if I'm the Capone player and I'm trying to move my thug into this district right here that has 3 different police officers in it, just to do so, I must spend $6. If I fail to do so, I can't take the action. Matter of fact, this isn't one of those circumstances where you can just pay what you have left over and still take the action. If you're doing this by choice, you have to be able to pay the entire cost. Now, if you're forced to move there by another player and you can't afford the cost, you're still going to end up making the movement, but then you're going to spend the remaining amount of money you have left over. So for example, if a player forces my thug to go into this district and I only have $5 left, I'm going to lose all 5 of my dollars and my thug is still going to be forced to move into that district because of the bribery action taking place. Additionally, police officers are also going to add to the defense level of every single neighborhood. Now, we'll cover neighborhoods in just a moment here, but do note that neighborhoods have a certain amount of defense value on the upper left-hand corner of every one of these neighborhoods. Now, defense values can be different based on the front, the day side, or the back, the night side of that specific neighborhood, but every single police officer adds 1 to the defense of the neighborhood. So in this example, if I had all 3 of these police officers in this dayside neighborhood, the total defense of this neighborhood will be a total defense of 6. Whereas if this neighborhood had been flipped to its night side and we see that the defense value is now 6, we see the total defense for this neighborhood now happens to be 9, making this a neighborhood that's very, very hard for our opponents to conquer. Next up, we're going to have our jobs cards. Now, our job cards come in 2 different varieties. We have the instant jobs and then we have the permanent jobs. Now, every single one of these jobs is going to have an effect when you manage to get into play, but to get these jobs into play, we have to meet certain requirements. Now, those requirements are going to be listed on every single one of these cards. Some jobs have lots of requirements, some have a little bit less requirements, and basically they should be pretty much self-explanatory. For example, to get this job into play, all you have to do is have a crime rate of 6 or less. If you have a crime rate of 6 or less, you simply play this card as an instant and its effect is going to go off. Whereas opposed to this job right here requires you have a dealer storage at 3 or higher. You need to have 2 bodyguard cards in your plan, and it doesn't mean in your hand or your discard pile. You have to actually play them in your plan on your turn. And then finally, you need to spend $10. If you do all 3 of these things, you're going to place this job into play, and it's going to give you a permanent benefit for your gang. Now, this is going to add to the symmetry of the game, because as you add more of these permanents into the game, they're going to give you various different powers. Now, these powers stay in play as a permanent. They stay in play. Instants just have their effect, and then they're going to be discarded. If for any reason you're forced to discard one of your finished jobs, you're going to place it back face down in your available jobs pile, and then you have to pay for it to come back into play again. So if you ever lose a job, it doesn't get discarded if it's a permanent. It goes back into your available jobs that you still have to fulfill to get it back into play again. Next up, we have our cars and trucks. Now, every single player starts the game with 2 trucks, and they're going to start the game with 3 cars, of which one we've already seen during setup will start the game in play. Now, these different vehicles have different benefits to them based on what kind of vehicle it is. Trucks are basically going to help us make sales, and cars are going to allow us the ability to go ahead and attack the neighborhoods or protect our neighborhoods from the other rival gangs. And the basic way this works is any car that happens to be in a neighborhood is going to add to the defense of that neighborhood if you control that neighborhood. It's also going to subtract from the defense of that neighborhood if you're attacking that neighborhood and you happen to have one of your cars in that same district. And the way that simply works is for every car you have, it's going to add +1 to the defense of the neighborhood that you control. For every car you have in the district on a neighborhood you're attacking, it's going to subtract 1 from the defense of that neighborhood. And again, those benefits do stack. Now, the benefits of the trucks are going to reduce the cost of the amount of resources you need to sell in a neighborhood to go ahead and make the amount of money that's available to that neighborhood. Every one of these neighborhoods, we'll cover this in just a moment, is going to have a certain amount of resources you must discard to make a sale in that neighborhood. For every single truck you happen to have in the same district as that neighborhood is going to reduce the cost by 1, and those cost benefits do stack. And 1 truck can modify multiple neighborhoods that happen to be in the same district just by having multiple of your trucks in the same district. For example, if I happen to be the Capone player and I happen to control both these neighborhoods in the same district right here, I would be able to subtract 2 from the amount of resources I need to discard here to get $16. And then I can subtract 2 from this neighborhood additionally to make a sale in this neighborhood to go and get $14. And I don't need to even make these trucks be the same bonus that I'm going to get. For example, I can make this truck do -1 to the guns, this truck -1 to the alcohol, meaning they only need to discard 1 alcohol barrel to make a $16 sale. And then over in the neighborhood, both of these trucks can represent 2 barrels of alcohol, meaning again, I only need to discard 1 barrel of alcohol to make another sale for $14. So the nice thing about these trucks is they do stack, but they only affect the district they happen to be in, and they're going to affect all the neighborhoods you happen to control in that specific district. And since we're talking about the neighborhoods, let's go ahead and cover the neighborhoods right now. Now the game does come with neighborhoods that have a day side and a night side. Generally speaking, the day side is going to be easier to make sales to the places. They have lower defense, but they're also going to give you lower rewards. The night side of these neighborhoods are going to give you more lucrative rewards, have higher defense, and they're also going to have much more greater requirements to make those sales. Now in the game, all the neighborhoods start off with their day side up, and the only way for its side or a neighborhood to go to its night side is by one player advancing their gang by taking the nightclub action down here. Every single time one player takes the nightclub action that improves their gang, they can pick one of the neighborhoods that they currently control and flip it over to its night side. Once a neighborhood has been flipped over to its night side, it's going to stay there for the rest of the game, even if another player manages to take over that gang and steal the neighborhood from you, it's going to stay to its night side. So it's kind of a gamble when you go for taking over these neighborhoods and flipping over to the night side. So luckily they're easier to defend, but make sure you don't lose them, because if you do, you're offering a great way for your opponents to start making some much more lucrative deals. We see $14 versus $42. That's a huge difference in a game that's all about getting the most money. Now, just to cover every one of these neighborhoods really quickly, this is going to be the defense value of the neighborhood. This is the amount of sale resources that you need to make a sale. That's how much money you're going to make from a sale in that neighborhood. And just as an example, when we're talking about sales in neighborhoods, we see that the resources can come from the neighborhoods themselves, plus any deals that we happen to have resources. When we make deals in neighborhoods, and I'll explain how the deals work when we get to that point, just understand that the resources have to come from the neighborhoods themselves or from dealers. They can't come from other neighborhoods you control or neighborhoods controlled by other players. So for me to make a sale in this neighborhood, it takes 4 alcohol barrels and 2 guns. We say there's only 3 alcohol and 2 guns in this neighborhood right now. Well, if I happen to have a dealer that has 1 alcohol barrel, I can take that 1 alcohol barrel off the dealer, spend a 3 alcohol from the neighborhood itself, plus spending the 2 guns themselves, and that's going to go ahead and give me $42 that I get to add to my empire. You can only make sales in neighborhoods you control, but that's how the sales are going to work. Additionally, you're going to see that every single neighborhood has a symbol in the upper right-hand corner showing 3 boxes in a warehouse. That symbolizes that all neighborhoods can have an unlimited supply of resources placed on them when it comes to alcohol and guns. Do note, only the person who controls the neighborhood has access to those resources. So that's where the area control mechanisms of the game come in. Because if you have a neighborhood where you've piled lots of resources on it because it has unlimited ability to take resources, unlike the dealers, it becomes much more lucrative and becomes much more of an incentive of the other gangs to go ahead and attack it, go against the defense of the neighborhood, and steal that neighborhood from you, because when they steal that neighborhood, they get all those resources because they're all left behind when you're forced out of your own neighborhoods. Finally, every single neighborhood can have businesses on it. Now, every single neighborhood can have a total of 3 businesses maximum on it among the brothels, the casinos, and the speakeasies. Additionally, there is one more kind of business called a nightclub. And the way the nightclub is going to happen, we'll explain to that when we get there. But a nightclub is a 4th business that can be added. The nightclub does not count towards the max amount of business allowed on every single neighborhood. And matter of fact, neighborhoods can have multiple of the same businesses as long as we respect the max amount of businesses that are allowed on the neighborhood. So for example, this neighborhood could have 3 speakeasies. It can never get another brothel, or it can never get a casino, because that reaches a limit of 3 businesses. But the nightclub does allow you to break that rule and go towards a 4th business. Other than that, every single neighborhood is limited to a maximum amount of businesses that can ever be present on it. Additionally, every single neighborhood is only allowed to have 1 control marker on it at any time. Whoever has their control marker on the neighborhood controls that neighborhood. If you kick an opponent out of the neighborhood, you're simply going to remove their control marker and place your control marker in place of that neighborhood. Whoever controls the neighborhood is the only one who can add resources to that neighborhood. And again, like I said earlier, all neighborhoods have an unlimited amount of resources that can be played on them. Your dealers that you control have a maximum amount of resources. So you see how the game works. Players are going to get lots of resources, but they have to start placing them on the neighborhoods because their dealers cannot contain all the resources they need to start making the larger sales. So the way the game is going to be playing is players are going to be trying to keep the neighborhoods as long as possible and stopping their opponents, or if they have to, taking the neighborhoods back and gaining control back of them. That way they can keep access to the resources that are left on these individual neighborhoods. The important thing to understand here, though, is that if there's ever a time where you do not control enough or do not control any neighborhoods, and you ever gain excess resources that you cannot place on your dealers, all those excess resources are going to be lost. So the game incentivizes you to control at least one neighborhood, but don't make that one neighborhood too lucrative, because otherwise it's a giant bullseye for all the other players to start beelining right for that neighborhood. And oh yeah, some of the gangs, such as the Black Wolves, love neighborhoods with lots of supplies. They're going to move in lots of thugs. You'll see why when you play the game. Next up, we have our crime rate and our raid cards. Now, the crime rate track is very, very interesting. Now, the crime rate track is going to continue to rise as players take various different actions. Additionally, Elliot Ness himself is also going to continue to rise. Now, no player's crime rate marker can ever be at the level of Elliot Ness or below him. They must always be at least one step ahead of Elliot Ness. If Elliot Ness ever advances to a space that a player currently has a crime rate marker, he's going to bump their crime rate up one more level as he's going to take that spot. Elliot Ness's max level happens to be level 6, which is still fortunately in the yellow, but since no player can be at his level or below, that means at one point eventually in the game, all the players' crime rates are going to be in the orange or red level, and that's how our raid cards are going to work. Every single one of these raid cards is going to have a raid effect, which is going to affect all of the players on the game. Next up, every single player is going to have an individual effect based on their current crime rate level, whether it happens to be in the green, the yellow, the orange, or the red. That's based on your individual crime rate level. Then additionally, every single player's crime rate level is going to be affected based on whatever the card happens to say on the bottom of it. Do note, if it tells you to lower your crime rate level to a level where Elliot Ness is currently at, you don't get the benefit of that crime rate lowering, because remember, your crime rate marker can never be on the same space of Elliot Ness or below it. But beyond that, most of these cards should be pretty self-explanatory. Everybody, somebody based on the crime rate level, then everybody might get a bonus as long as Elliot Ness does not foil their plans. Now that you know how a raid card is resolved, let's go ahead and resolve how actually a raid actually happens. Whenever a raid happens, that's going to occur whenever single one of the player's crime rate levels gets all the way up to level 11, or it's also going to occur in a different phase, and we'll explain that when we get to that phase itself. But let's go ahead and cover it right here, right now. Once one player's raid crime rate level gets to the raid level, we're going to have a raid that's going to occur. Every time a raid occurs, all of the thugs that are currently in the underworld are all immediately going to go to prison. That'll be very important when we cover the prison and also the reorganization phase a little bit later, but just understand they're all going to go from the underworld all to the prison. Every single player gets to suffer that a little bit of indignity. Next thing that's going to happen is we're going to reveal the top card of the raid deck, and that raid deck card is going to go ahead and activate. And I've already shown you how that works, so I'm not going to cover that again. But after that raid card is resolved, we're simply going to discard it or simply place it back on the bottom of the deck, because there are so many raid cards in this game, you're never going to see all of them in one single game. I guess unless you threw all the news cards in and made it like a 14-hour game. That'd be a little bit crazy. Might be fun, but definitely be a little bit crazy. Finally, we have the time track itself, and the time track is going to be tracking down towards the end of the game. Remember, like I said earlier, once the final card is revealed, the Prohibition Ends card is finally revealed. Immediately when it's revealed, that's going to bring about the end of the game. All the players are going to add up all their victory points based on the cash they have. And if you ever forget, there's a nice, wonderful reminder on every one of our shields. But we're going to take the total amount of cash we have in our hand. We're going to get $2 for every single associate level we happen to have in our hand, our discard pile, and our current plans, or anywhere we currently have associate cards that we have purchased throughout the game. Every single star level on every one of those cards is going to give us $2. Additionally, we're going to get $3 for every business we currently control. Now remember, like I said earlier, control is based on your control marker. So if at the end of the game, this is all Capone controlled, one business, that'd be worth $3 for us at the end of the game. Then we may get some other benefits from jobs we may have played throughout the game. We're going to use that to total up our total amount of money. Whoever has the most amount of money is going to be the grand winner of the game. Now, there's a tie for grandest winner of the game at this point. You're going to figure out who has the most amount of money behind their shield. That's going to be the tiebreaker. And if that is still a tie at that point, well, the players who have that shared amount of money are going to have a shared victory, or, you can play another game to figure out who's going to be the grand winner of Scarface 1920. But the time track, back to that time track, is going to advance every single time somebody takes a reorganization turn. And that's any time. So if you have multiple players who are taking reorganization turns back to back to back, this time track can advance multiple times after every single round. But it only advances anytime there is a reorganization turn. Additionally, if the time track enters the extra space, or it's already on the extra space due to advancing from other things that may have occurred and that may occur during the game, but if it's already on the extra space and a player is taking a reorganization turn, that is going to go ahead and reveal the next news card. I'll explain how that works when it's taking an extra phase. Boy, that's going to be fun to say over time. extra phase. Extra. Yeah, that's going to get really fun for me. But anytime that this time marker is on the extra phase, during a reorganization phase, and only during a reorganization phase, we're going to take the next card, we're going to flip it over, we're going to reveal it, carry out whatever happens to be, whatever benefits it may have, and these are going to be permanent effects added to the game until that card is covered by the next news card by another extra phase going ahead and occurring. And again, this is going to keep advancing until, like I said already, we reveal that final card. Prohibition ends at last. All the players add up all their victory points, and we have a grand winner of the game. So that's an explanation for all the components of the game. Like I said, this was the longest part. Now I can teach you how to play the game, because the rest of it is just playing cards, getting resources, taking actions, getting money, and yep, you guessed it, trying to be the richest to win the game. The game of Scarface 1920 is played out over turns in a clockwise manner. On a player's turn, they're going to do either an action turn or a reorganization turn. And then once they're completed with their turn, the next player in clockwise order is going to go. This is going to keep going on until one player manages to take a final reorganization phase that causes a final extra to occur, which is going to cause that final news card to be revealed, which is, like I said multiple times, is going to end the game. Now, on a player's turn themselves, when it comes to their turn, they're either going to take an action turn or a reorganization turn. This is not optional. It's mandatory. You have to take one or the other. And the way you're going to figure out which one you're going to take is based on if you happen to have any cards left. You have at least one card in your hand and or in your draw pile, you must take an action turn. It's not optional. You have no choice. You cannot take a reorganization turn. If you do not have any cards in your hand, if you do not have any cards in your draw pile, then you must take a reorganization turn. It's not an optional. You cannot choose to take a different kind of turn. It's either action turn if you have at least one card left. It's reorganization turn if you have no cards left. Let's go ahead and start things off by covering exactly how an action turn works, looking at all the different options we have, whether it's going to the underworld, going to the authorities, carrying out various different actions. Let's go and cover all those things we can do. The first thing a player must do on the start of their turn is they must see if they currently control the family ring. If they control the family ring at the beginning of the turn, like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter if it's a reorganization turn or an action turn. If they control the ring, they're going to gain a certain amount of money based on the player count -1. So in a 4-player game, you would gain $3. In a 2-player game, like we have set up here, you're going to go ahead and gain $1. After you gain that money, then you're going to figure out if you're going to have the action or the reorganization turn. The first thing you're going to do on the action turn is you're going to look at your hand of cards and you're going to place some of these cards out into your plan. Now you can play an unlimited amount of cards from your hand. There is nothing stopping you from playing 1 card, 2 cards, all the way up to 5 cards, which is the maximum hand size in the game. So if you decide to pay out 5 cards, you would get all the benefits from playing all those cards. Here's the biggest caveat though. If during your action turn, if you play out more than 2 cards into your plan, and playing your cards out is called forming your plan, you're going to go up 1 level on the crime rate for every single card you play beyond the 2. So if you play 5 cards out, your crime rate is going to go up 3 levels. If you play 2 cards or 1 card, your crime rate is not going to be modified at all. So it kind of behooves you, depending on what actions you want to take, to try not to play as many cards or try to get the better cards that give you the more muscle, the more influence, so you're getting greater benefits without your crime rate climbing up too darn quickly. Now for the action phase, you are required to play at least 1 card. Remember, it's mandatory. You have to play at least 1 card. But if for any reason you don't have any cards in your hand, you're going to skip the plan phase, you're going to skip the action phase, you're going to move immediately to the draw phase, where you draw a certain amount of cards to fill your hand back up to your hand limit size. Now it's very important that you're not going to draw your hand limit size and add it to your hand. You're going to draw up to your hand limit, and that's going to be very important when I start explaining that part of the phase. After you do that, you're going to finish the rest of your round, and the next player is going to go. But let's go ahead and pretend in this example, for this tutorial, that you currently have at least 1 card in your hand, so you're going to start playing some cards out in your hand and formulating your plan. Now, cards you're going to play out in your plan are going to give you various different benefits, resources, as I explained before. They're going to give you the little BAM symbol. Sorry, a nice reference to the Batman cartoons and the TV shows from the 1960s. Yes, way before my time, but that's the only name I can give to that symbol. But you're going to use that symbol. That's going to be the amount of muscle you're going to generate based on the cards you play into your plan. Again, that's very important. It's not the cards in your hand. It's the amount of cards that you play into your plan. Remember, more than 2 cards, yep, that crime rate is going to go up. But the symbol is going to give you the amount of muscle you're going to generate, and the handshake symbol is going to give you the total amount of influence you're going to generate. So for this example, let's say I decide to play this card and this card right here into my plan. I would generate 1 muscle and I would generate 1 influence. If I decide to play this card as well, my crime rate, let's bring it down here so I can demonstrate this much, much better. If I played out these 3 cards right here, I'd raise my crime rate up by 1 level, and then I would gain 2 muscle and I would gain 1 influence. I'll show you what these resources are used for when we cover all the various different actions. It's just very important to understand that. If I decide to play out a 4th card, my crime rate would go out 1 more point, and in this example I would gain 3 muscle and 1 influence. The trick here is that every single player has one of their boss cards that happens to be in their hand of cards. Now you notice your boss card has no statistics on it because the statistics of your boss card are going to be based on the current level of your gang. You're going to notice over here on your gang track right here, it shows the current statistics of your boss card based on where your boss manager happens to be. Additionally, you're also going to have a certain amount of skills based on which gang you happen to be playing. Every one of these gangs comes with 4 different skills, and your card itself, when you play this card, represents your gang board and statistics from your gang board. So if I happen to be the Capone player and I'm playing the Capone gang, I would have my 4 skills available to me, and my current muscle and my current influence is based on the current level of how far I moved on my gang board track. So at the start of the game, when I play my Capone card, down is part of my plan. I'm going to gain 1 muscle and I'm going to gain 1 influence. Additionally, I have access to these 4 skills. Now these 4 skills are effectively printed on the card and I have access to those 4 skills. The trick is I can only use my skills 3 times. Now I can use the same skill multiple times if I want, but those are the skills I have access to, and again, I can only choose 3 of them. But as your boss levels up, their strength and ability is going to go up based on the current location of the boss manager. So once I level up my boss the first time, now I have 1 muscle and I have 2 influence. Do note, all the gang leaders have different statistics here, so I'm just showing you Capone himself. If you look over at the Black Wolves gang leader, you see that their rate of their statistics is much more muscle-oriented, whereas opposed we see Capone is much more influence-oriented. So just make sure you understand that not only do we have different skills, we have different statistics. But again, this is going to be a snaking track. As we get to the top, we're going to gain more statistics. So by the time we get all the way up to this level right here, this card, every time I play, is going to be worth 3 muscle and 3 influence for this specific boss. Now I'll explain leveling up the gang a little bit later. Just want to make sure you understand exactly how the card for your boss itself is represented. Its statistic is based on the location of your boss, plus the skills that you gain access to every time you play this boss. And again, you only get to pick 3 of those 4, again, repeating if you like. Additionally, after you calculate the amount of resources you're going to gain from playing out your plan based on the muscle and the influence, you're going to notice that all these cards have skills on the bottom of them. Now remember, on your turn, you can play as many of the skills as you want. Each one can be used 1 time only, except for your boss card. That's the only exception. Or you can also get abilities from your job. So the basic flow of the game is going to be you're going to lay out your entire plan. That's going to give you your resources. Once you have your total resource count, then you're going to decide to use any skills you may want to, any powers from jobs you may want to, and then you're going to use those resources you gained to go ahead and take actions on the board. Here's the cool thing about this. You can do this in any order you want. I can take an action, use a skill, do a job, do a skill, do a skill, do another job, then end my turn. Or if I want to be fancy, I can take a skill, use another skill. That skill may allow me to unlock another skill due to one of those chains like I showed earlier. Then I may take my action, use the ability of a job, use another skill from a card I played, and then end my turn. So it's very important to understand that these cards are going to give you resources and those skills that you have access to. But now that I've explained this, let's go ahead and talk about all the actions we can take based on the resources we've generated. Now the interesting thing about this game is, like I said, you can gain your resources and use your skills on your turn, but jobs are very unique. Jobs can be used on your turn or on other players' turns, so that's very, very important. Jobs can be nice little bits of power that you can use to influence and improve the power of your gang. But now let's go ahead and cover those actions I've mentioned multiple times. Kept you in enough suspense, let's go ahead and cover them really, really quick. Now in this game, there are 3 different kinds of actions that are available to all of our players. Now there is a nice, wonderful turn overview that does come with the game. This is double-sided. One side shows you how to do the action turn. The other side is going to tell you how to do an organization turn, and it's also going to cover the extra and the carry out a raid section. There's actually a really phenomenal play or aid. There's also a copy on the back of the rule book if you ever need it, but make sure every single one of the players gets one of these because it's very super duper handy. But you're going to see that there are underworld actions and the actions that are associated with that. There are authorities actions and the actions that are associated with that. And then finally, there's other actions, which are in the amount of things that are associated with that happens to be. Generally speaking, underworld and authorities actions require you to have thugs to perform those actions. The other actions don't generally require you to actually have thugs. Now, there's a little bit of differences between that, but that's the basic overview. So let's go ahead and cover the underworld actions first. Every time you decide that you're going to take an underworld action, you must take one of your thugs from your headquarters. Again, they have to come from your headquarters. Cannot come from your slums or from the safe houses. They have to come from your headquarters itself. If you don't have any of your thugs in your headquarters, guess what? You're limited on actions you're going to be able to take on your turn. So the first thing you're going to do is take one of your thugs and you're going to add them to your underworld. After you've added your thug to the underworld, you're going to count up the total amount of thugs in your underworld. So if I happen to already have a couple thugs there right now, and then I decide I'm going to take an underworld action, I'll add my underworld thug to that location, and then my current crime rate is going to go up based on the total amount of thugs I now have, including the thug I just added. So the first thug, not too bad, crime rate goes up by 1. But now my next thug I add is going to raise my crime rate by 2. And then you guessed it, my third thug, at least in this example, is going to lead to a raid, at least for the Capone player. Probably not what the Capone player wants to do. So it's something we need to be very, very careful about when we're adding our thugs to the underworld. But do understand, first thing you do is add that thug to the underworld. And there's a nice reminder here. The moment you do that, count up the total amount of thugs you have in the underworld and raise your crime rate by that level. After we've handled raising the crime rate, we're going to decide to do one of the 5 different actions that we can go ahead and do in the underworld location. So the first action we can do is we can go ahead and hire one associate. Now you see that there's all these associates down here on the road, 1 to 3 cost associates and 4 to 5 cost associates. The total amount of influence we generated on our turn is going to dictate which one of these cards we can buy. We can only buy one of these cards, but we can buy any card that has amount of stars equal to or less than the total amount of influence we generated. So if we happen to generate 4 total influence, we'd be able to buy any one of these cards on the table right now. But if we only manage to generate 1 or 2 influence, that's going to limit the amount of cards we can potentially buy to maybe these 2 cards right here. Now again, your influence resources is based on the total amount of influence in your plan. And again, we're just going to factor that. We're going to pick one of the cards based on the amount of influence we generated and pick a card of that cost or less in stars. And then we're going to decide to either add that card to our discard pile or we're going to add it to our hand. If we decide to add it to our hand, though, it's going to be a little bit of a cost on our gang. If it's a 1 to 3 star associate, we need to spend 1 alcohol to add that card directly to our hand. If it's a 4 or a 5 cost associate, we need to spend 2 alcohol to add that associate to our hand. Now, if we don't have any alcohol to pay for it, or we don't want to pay the cost of the alcohol itself, then we're simply going to take the associate that we purchased and go ahead and put them into our discard pile. After we purchase the associate and add them either to our discard pile or to our hand, we're simply going to refill the stack by sliding all the cards to the right to fill up the slot that was taken, and then we're going to reveal the new top card of the associate pile, and that associate pile is now going to be available to the next player in player order when it comes to their turn. Don't forget though, every single time you purchase an associate and add them either to your discard pile or directly to your hand, you immediately claim the family ring, add the family ring onto your empire board as a nice reminder that you're going to get some free money at the start of every single one of your turns. The next action you can take in the underworld is you can go ahead and get a job. Now the total amount of influence that you generated in your plan is going to dictate how many job cards you're going to draw. So for example, if I manage to generate 3 influence in my plan from the cards I played, I'm going to draw 3 job cards. I'm going to look at all the job cards I drew, pick one of them to keep face down without revealing to the other players, and the other cards I'm going to discard to the bottom of the jobs deck, and none of the other players are going to be any wiser. Now this job is going to be an unfinished job. I'll place it over to the side with the rest of my gang, and that's going to be a job I can work on, accomplish its requirements, and possibly get into play and use its benefits at a later time. Or maybe even during my current turn if I can meet the requirements of the card I just gained. The next action we can take is we can go ahead and gain 1 dealer. And the amount of dealers we're going to draw from the dealer pile, again, is going to be based on the amount of influence we generated. So let's say we generate only 2 influence on our turn. We'll draw the top 2 cards. We'll look at those deals, and then we're going to take one of these deals and we're going to keep it. And all the other deals that we're unable to keep, we're going to discard back to the bottom of the dealer's deck. And then that is going to be a deal that we now get to add. Now here's the trick. When we take a deal, we have one of 2 options. We can take this deal right here, right now, and add it as a new deal into our empire, as we see by using the example of the Black Wolves gang here. If I were to do so, I would simply take this deal, place it to the right of my other deals, and now this is another deal I can make deals with by simply sending a thug to go ahead and make sales or to gain resources that I may be able to add to my empire. Additionally, as an alternate option, you can use this deal to strengthen the amount of resources you can get from a deal whenever you go there. Now, what this does is this does two things. One, it's still only one deal, which means only one thug can ever go to that location. But if a thug goes there and if you can generate the total amount of resources, you're going to gain the total amount of resources. So this deal is now more lucrative for one single action. So you must decide if you want to create one new deal or just add that to a deal that you already have in effect to go ahead and make that deal much more stronger. Again, it's something you need to balance because the costs have gone up, but the rewards have also gone up for the same amount of actions. It's something you need to balance. The next action you do from going to the underworlds is you can sell in the neighborhoods. Now, to sell in the neighborhoods, you can make as many unique sales based on your total influence in any neighborhood that you currently control. So let's say in this example board right here, I miraculously managed to generate 15 influence from some magic ninja card play. I only have one neighborhood. I can only sell in that one neighborhood. So generating lots of influence may not be a great idea if you need to sell in neighborhoods because you can only sell in each neighborhood one time per point of influence you generate. So let's say I managed to control 2 neighborhoods in our wonderful example right here. I managed to generate only 1 influence. I have to pick which one of these neighborhoods I want to sell in. Let's say I managed to control 3 neighborhoods. I generate 5 influence. I can sell once in all 3 of these neighborhoods. Now, the way you're going to make a sale in a neighborhood is you need to discard amount of resources based on the cost for that specific neighborhood. Now, these resources can come directly from the neighborhoods themselves, depending on resources that you manage to place in those neighborhoods themselves, or the resources can also come from resources that you kept on deals. Here's the trick though. You cannot steal resources from other neighborhoods you control to go ahead and make a purchase at a specific neighborhood itself. Sorry, I said purchase, I meant sale. You know what I mean here. To make a sale at this neighborhood, I can only take the resources from this neighborhood itself, plus the deals I control. To make a sale in this neighborhood, I can only take from these resources in this neighborhood, plus the resources I currently have in my deals. Again, this neighborhood, same thing. So to make a sale, I'm going to discard a total amount of resources based on the cost right here, and I'm going to immediately gain this amount of money. Here's the trick and the caveat. This is where the police officers can start making challenges and difficulties for me and my efforts to become the most lucrative gang in all of Chicago. After each individual sale is calculated for every single neighborhood individually, I'm going to subtract 2 from my profits for every single police officer that happens to be in the neighborhood. So in this example, if I were to sell in this neighborhood right here and there happen to be 3 police officers, I would gain only 13 money from this neighborhood, whereas this neighborhood would give me 14, and this one would also give me 14 if I made sales there. Additionally, don't forget for every single truck you have in that specific district, you can reduce the cost that it costs to make from sales in that neighborhood based on the total amount of trucks. So if I happen to have 2 trucks in this neighborhood, to sell in this neighborhood right here, I only need to discard 2 barrels of alcohol, and the alcohol can come from the neighborhood itself or from the deals I have, and I'm going to gain a total of $13 from the sale in this neighborhood because the officers are going to require the bribery, allow me to make the money there. Whereas opposed to this neighborhood right here, I would need to discard 3 total alcohol from the neighborhood or from my personal deals to make $14. And in this neighborhood, again, 3 alcohol since I don't have any trucks to make $14. And again, if I sold in all 3 of these neighborhoods with this current board saves right here, I would make a total of $41. 14, 14, 28 plus 13 is 41. Unless math failed me. Hopefully it didn't because that'd be really embarrassing because that was on camera. The final action you can do in a neighborhood is going to be the recruit action right here. Now, I did these slightly out of order. Sorry, you can yell at me later. But let's go ahead and cover up what recruitment works like. For every point of influence, you're going to recruit by using your thug board. I'll show you exactly how that works. For every point of recruitment, you're going to move one of your thugs from one section towards the next section itself. And it's the same thug can move multiple times if you like. So for example, if I manage to generate 4 points of influence, I can use 1 point of influence, 2 points of influence, 3 points of influence, and then 4 points of influence to go ahead and move 4 thugs into my safe house. Now, all of those thugs in my safe house are now available for me to go ahead and take actions of various different kinds, whether it's the underworld, the authorities, or just, try and take over the city itself. Now that we covered the underworld actions, let's go ahead and cover the actions we can take in the authorities. To take an action in the authorities, you guess it, just like working in the underworld, we'll take one of our thugs and we're going to send them to the authorities. Luckily, sending them to the authorities does not influence our crime rate because, authorities versus, underworld. It should make sense. But once we move to the authorities, we're going to have access to 5 different actions we can take. And we just have to generate enough influence in our plan to go ahead and take any one of those actions. Let's go and cover those actions right now. The first action we can take is we can go ahead and we can sell to the authorities. Yes, I'm doing this out of order again, and this is the order I like. Just stick with me for a second. But for every barrel or alcohol we have, we can go ahead and sell those to the authorities, and every one we sell is going to be worth $6 to us. The trick here is the maximum amount of sales we can make is going to be based on our influence. So if we generate 4 influence and we have at least 4 resources between the alcohol and the guns, we can sell all 4 of those to go ahead and make $24. But if we don't have enough influence or we don't have enough resources, those are going to be the caps that we make when it comes to sales. But again, each one we sell from the resources we control from our deals in the areas we control, for every one we sell is going to be worth $6 to us. The next thing we can do is we can reduce our crime rate for 1 point per point of influence we generated. So if we happen to be all the way here at the magic number 10, we manage to generate 6 points of influence, then we can sell all that influence to go with our crime rate all the way back into the magic safe green level. Again, never forget, you can never go below the level of Elliott Ness. That is the one caveat that you can never break in the rules. The next thing we can do is we can perform a jailbreak. Well, it's not really a jailbreak. It's just bribing the right people, because we can spend, if we have at least 2 influence, we can go to the prison, find all the prisoners that we happen to have for us and our matching gang color, and we put all of these thugs back into our headquarters, and they're now available for future actions. Again, you must generate at least 2 influence, but you can take all the thugs you have in prison, put them back on your headquarters. Next, we can go ahead and grow our businesses, and for every point of influence we generate, we can add 1 business to any one of the neighborhoods we currently control. Don't forget about the maximums. There can never be more than 3 of any kind of businesses per neighborhood, ignoring that nightclub reference I made earlier about upgrading our gang board. But just understand that we can put these businesses out there in any business we control. So if we happen to generate 4 influence, we can add 4 businesses among all the different neighborhoods that we currently control. You pick the business you want, and the amount of businesses you may want to put out could be based on job cards you have. For example, you might have a job card that references brothels. So that means you need to build some brothels out there to get that job card into play. Trust your instincts, trust the cards you need to play to go ahead and do the right choices for your businesses. The final thing you can do in the authorities, and this is one of the nice things, is you can go ahead and spend 5 influence. You must generate at least 5 influence to go ahead and remove a control marker from a neighborhood. Now, obviously, you would not want to remove one of your own control markers, but you can always remove the control marker of an opponent. As long as you can generate 5 influence, you're going to take that control marker and you're going to return it to that player. They now have lost control of that neighborhood, but they may not have lost presence. What's presence? Let's go and cover presence really quick right here, right now. Presence in this game is going to come if you have at least 1 control marker, 1 thug, or 1 vehicle in a district. If you happen to do so, you currently have presence in that specific district. It's going to be very important when I'm talking about movement, because we're now about to cover the last actions you can take on your turn that don't involve the authorities or the underworld. Let's call these the other actions. Now, the nice thing about these other actions is they don't require you to spend any of your thugs to the authorities or the underworld. This is basically where we're going to start influencing the board itself. The first action we can do is another action is we can start sending thugs from our headquarters to any district we currently have influence. Our explained influence, any district you have presence. I misspoke there. Any district you currently have presence. If you have presence and you have muscle generated, you can start sending thugs to those districts. For every point of muscle that you generate, take 1 of your thugs from your headquarters and place them in any single district where you currently have influence. You cannot place these thugs in areas where you do not have influence. That's a different action to move your thugs. But if I generate 3 muscle, I can take 3 of my thugs from my neighborhoods, from my headquarters, and place them in any of the districts I currently have influence. The trick here is that if you happen to do this in a district that currently has police officers, don't forget you need to pay that bribery we mentioned earlier in the video. And the important thing is that's going to be bribery we need to pay for every single thug we move into the neighborhood. So if I happen to be very crazy, and yes, this would be very crazy, to send all 3 of my thugs into this neighborhood with 3 police officers, it's going to be $6 I need to spend for every single thug, for a total of $18 I would need to spend to put all of my thugs into this neighborhood. Probably not the best thing to do. Let's start using some skills to move those police officers out of our neighborhoods before we take those actions, because don't forget we can do skills in any order. Now you see the importance of carrying out skills, actions, and jobs. that order can be very, very important to your strategies. The next thing we can do in the other phase, or the other action phase, is we can go ahead and move any thugs we currently have on the board. Again, on the board, not in prison, not in authorities, not in underworld. These are thugs that currently happen to be on the board. We can move one of our units among our thugs, our cars and our trucks for every point of muscle we generate. Here's the trick when we do this though. Thugs can only move to adjacent districts. Cars and trucks can move to any district out there on the board that we like. But if we happen to move a thug at the same time from a district that we move a car or a truck, they can move multiple districts inside the vehicle itself. So don't forget though, we still need to pay bribery if we move into a district that happens to be a police officer in it. And just to use an example, if I were to have 4 muscle generated, I can move up to 4 of my units out here on the board. I could spend one of my muscle to move from here to here, spending the bribery for the police officer, and then I can spend 1 more point of influence plus 2 more, muscle, not influence, for a total of 3 more of my muscle to put all 2 of these thugs into this car right here, and then they can move all the way over to this region over here, just like that, through the movement action. Now this is the movement action specifically, allows you to move your thugs and your vehicles all around the board. Now earlier I said to you I was going to explain 2 very important terms for this game. That's the term of adjacent and the term of next. They're very, very important. Next to and adjacent are about the same thing, but they definitely mean different things in this game. Adjacent means districts. This means that any adjacent district is adjacent to the next one. So this main district right here is adjacent to the west-north side. It's adjacent to the north side. It's adjacent to the south side, and it's adjacent to the west-south side. So thugs can move adjacent by moving into the next adjacent area over. The term next to means that they occupy the same district and happen to be next to a neighborhood. That means that this thug and this car right here are next to this neighborhood, but this thug is adjacent to this district. This thug right here is next to this neighborhood, and they're also adjacent to this district, and they're also adjacent to this district right here, because these districts are blocked off by this red line. Very important terms to understand. Make sure you understand those when you're learning how to play the game. And now we come to the fun part, seizing the neighborhoods from our opponents or just gaining neighborhoods that don't happen to be controlled by a player at all. So the way we are going to seize neighborhoods is by going into various different areas that our opponents happen to be, or maybe it just happens to be a neighborhood that is currently not controlled by any other players. And this is going to be the seize a neighborhood action. To seize a neighborhood, you simply pick a neighborhood where you currently have presence. Remember, to have presence, you must have one of your units currently in that district itself, and then that unit is going to be next to, remember that term, next to that neighborhood. So I have presence in this neighborhood. These neighborhoods are not controlled. I could try to take over one of these neighborhoods. This neighbor right here, I have presence in it, but it is controlled by an opponent, so I could try to take it over, but there's going to be some challenges in doing so, and I'm going to show you how to make those challenges just a little bit greater in just a moment. So how do we do the takeover action? Well, to do the takeover action, we simply need to generate enough muscle to do so. If we generate enough muscle, we succeed. If we don't generate enough muscle, we're going to fail. So before you take this action, make sure you do the math, because if you don't do the math, it's pretty silly of you to do that, because it's just a little bit of addition and a little bit of subtraction. Every single neighborhood has a certain amount of defense. If you can generate that amount of muscle or greater, you take the neighborhood. Now remember, every neighborhood can either have one control marker on it of your faction, a control marker of another gang faction, or no control marker on it at all. The amount of units and control markers on a neighborhood are going to dictate the pluses and the minuses to the amount of muscle we need to generate. What exactly does that mean? Well, I'll go in and cover that very, very quickly. In every single neighborhood, for every single control marker that happens to be on top of that neighborhood that is from an opponent's gang is going to add 2 to the defense of this neighborhood. So one control marker is going to bring this control from, or defense from 3 all the way up to 5. So we see this defense is now up to 5 for this neighborhood. Additionally, for every single police officer that happens to be in that neighborhood, we're going to add +1 more to the defense. So we see in this area over here, this neighborhood has a defense of 4 because this police officer is next to the neighborhood. This neighborhood has a defense of 4 also because this police officer is next to that neighborhood. So for me to take either one of these neighborhoods, I need to make sure I generate at least 4 muscle. In this neighborhood over here, we see that it's a little bit different because my opponent happens to have some extra defenses, including a car, because an opponent's car is also going to add +1 to the defense, and a thug will also add +1 to the defense as well. But the bonuses here for me is for every single car I happen to have in the area next to the neighborhood, for every thug I happen to have in the area next to the neighborhood, I'm going to reduce the amount of defense for that specific neighborhood it is going to have. So the total amount of mouth we're looking for here is +2 for every control marker by an opponent, +1 for each police officer, +1 for each thug vehicle owned by an opponent controlling the neighborhood, and -1 for each thug or vehicle that I happen to have next to the neighborhood that I'm trying to take over. So in this example, this neighborhood is 3 defense, +1 from the police officer, -2 means I need to produce at least 2 muscle to take over this neighborhood. If I do so, I'm going to take over this neighborhood, and now I control it. Now, if I didn't make it clear enough, the control a neighborhood or take over neighborhood action is one action. You pick one neighborhood only. I don't get to pick multiple neighborhoods across the board. I pick the one neighborhood that I want to try for. But let's say I wanted to go ahead and try to take over this neighborhood right here. It has a defense of 3, +2 for the control marker for a total of 5, +1 more for 6, +1 more for a total of 7, -2 for my 2 thugs, so I must control, or to take over this neighborhood, I must produce at least 5 muscle. If I succeed in producing that much muscle, I'm going to remove my opponent's control marker, and I'm simply going to place my control marker on top of that neighborhood, and now I gain control of it. If there happen to be any resources on that neighborhood when it's taken over, they are going to stay on that neighborhood, and now that I control that neighborhood, I now have access to those resources, and I can start making sales on future turns, possibly using those resources to do so. That's where the control of the neighborhoods comes in. The caveat here, though, is if you are terrible at math and you misdo the math and you figure out how to create enough muscle, but missed it by 1 or 2, you fail in taking over the neighborhood, your action's lost, and then your friends across the table get to make fun of you because you failed a basic math addition and subtraction. Don't do it. It makes you look really silly. The next thing you do is you can go ahead and get supplies from the deals that you manage to generate with your gang. Now, to go ahead and get resources from a deal, you're simply going to take one of your thugs from your headquarters, and you're going to place it on one of the deals that doesn't already have a thug on it, because you'll see that each one of these deals has a limit of 1. Once you place your thug on that deal, you must generate that much resource in your plan from muscle and influence. If you do so, you're going to gain the total amount of resources based on the total amount of deal itself. So if I were to send my thug to this location right here, I must generate 1 muscle. I'm going to go ahead and gain 1 gun. Unfortunately, we see this location cannot have stored more than 1 resource on it at all. So if I gain that gun, I must go ahead and take that gun, and I must place this on a neighborhood I currently control. If I don't control any neighborhoods, I'm going to lose this resource. So make sure you control at least 1 neighborhood when you take this action. Neighborhoods have unlimited amount of resources they can control or contain. Your deals have a max amount of resources that they can contain each. But let's say I want to take advantage of that greater, more lucrative deal that I have over my deal column. You see this much more lucrative deal I have right here still only allows 1 thug from my headquarters to go there. But if I manage to produce at least 2 muscle and or influence, because you see that this is an option, I can either do 1 influence or 1 muscle plus 1 muscle right here. So for this example right here, I could do 1 muscle plus 1 influence, or I can do 2 influence. But if I manage to generate that much in my plan, I'm going to gain the total of both of these card deals right here, since this is 1 single deal. So I'm going to go ahead and gain 4 barrels of alcohol. Here's the challenge, though. We see that this deal, even though it's a 2-card deal, it still has a max amount of resources that I can hold, which is going to be 1 resource. And since there's only 1 resource right there, that means I need to take these 4 barrels of alcohol and put them on a neighborhood I currently control. And now you're starting to see how some neighborhoods can start looking very, very, very tempting to the other players to go ahead and kick you out of. Because if they kick you out of the neighborhood, they now control all those resources. So this is definitely a game where you want to avoid putting all your eggs in one basket, because it paints a huge target for the other players to go after. I've covered all the actions except for the one final thing. The game allows you to upgrade your gang, make your gang much more powerful. Let's go and break it down, because this is the best, most important action you may take, because it's going to make all the things that you can do so much better. Updating your gang is going to be the action that's actually going to allow you to make your boss card be much more powerful as you're playing the game. Additionally, it's also going to give you some extra benefits that are going to help you when you take various different actions. But how do you upgrade your gang? Well, it's pretty darn simple. The way you're going to do it is you're going to look at a basic cost, which will be based on whatever action upgrade you're trying to take. Now, every single gang has 6 different abilities, from their hand size to the amount of lawyers that they employ, recruiters, their dealers supply, how many vehicles they can add to the board, and also for nightclubs. And I'll explain how all those work in just a second. But the basic idea is you're going to see there's like a serpentine track that goes along right here that your boss happens to be along. Whatever level your boss is currently at is going to dictate what kind of stats your boss has whenever you play your boss card. Again, that's your muscle, and that's going to be your influence. Anytime you want to upgrade one of the statistics of your gang card, you're going to look at the cost based on the upgrade you're trying to get. And the cost is going to be right here above every one of these different sections. I'm going to tell you how much it's going to cost. Now, you can't bypass any of the upgrades. You have to do them sequential order, so you got to get the level 1, then the level 2 upgrade. But the basic idea is you're going to have to present or produce a certain amount of resources based on the specific skill you're trying to upgrade. For example, if you're trying to increase your hand size from 3 all the way up to 4, you need to make sure that you spend a certain amount of money and you need to produce a certain amount of muscle in your plan. If you do so and you take the action, you're simply going to take one of the cubes out, and again, you're going to follow the serpentine pattern. You have to do this in order. You're going to take the cube out, produce the amount of muscle required, then you're going to spend the amount of money, and that's going to go back into the supply, and then you can put the cube down here in that spot, signifying that now, from now on, your maximum hand size is 4, for example, in this example. But before you do that, you need to make sure that before you put the cube in there, it's going to tell you how much your crime rate is going to go up immediately when you put the cube into that slot. And that goes for all of these different slots. Once you put the cube in there, your crime rate is going to go up based on however much it says in that slot. Next thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you advance your crime boss miniature onto the next spot, and that now signifies exactly what statistics have now been raised for your crime boss. In this example, we see that the leader of this crime gang, Stephanie St. Clair, she now has a muscle of 2 and she now has an influence of 1. Now, if she decides to take the upgrade her gang action again on a later turn, she's simply going to pay the cost. Let's say we decide that we're going to do this upgrade right here. Again, this upgrade right here says that we need to spend $4 and we need to produce 2 muscle in our plan. So we're going to take the next cube in the order from the serpentine following. We're going to gain an increase in our crime rate on the crime rate track. We're going to put the cube in there right that, and then we're going to go ahead and advance. Notice our statistics have not gone up yet. So we need to do this a couple times. Again, the cost is going to be listed on our game board. Let's say we take the action again, and now you're going to start seeing that symbols are starting to appear. These symbols have very specific meanings. I'll explain them all in just a second. But make sure you're following the normal path of taking the cube, make sure you pay the money cost, produce the amount of resources, and then you can go ahead and take the next upgrade in order, as long as you produce enough muscle and enough influence, and you're willing to discard the money to go ahead and take the upgrade. And again, you're simply going to advance your miniature into the next slot. The trick here is, though, anytime you advance your miniature in one of the next slots, if there's any symbol right there, it's going to give you a benefit. There's multiple different symbols here, and the moment your miniature moves into that location, that's when you get the benefit. In this case, this is telling you to go ahead and look at your hand of 4 right-hand soldiers. You can pick one of those right-hand soldiers, and you're going to either add it to your discard pile, or you're going to add it directly to your hand. And you choose any one of the 4 of your right-hand cards that you happen to have that you have not yet added. Now, do note that there's only way to get these right-hand men is by doing this action, and that does mean that you need to be very choosy about which right-hand man you're adding into your card deck, because they all have different benefits, different skills, and different powers. Now, the cool thing, though, when you move your miniature in there and you get the ability to add another right-hand man into your deck, you can either add it in your discard pile for no cost, or if you discard 2 alcohol that you control, you can go ahead and add that directly into your hand, just like getting the associates. Anytime you get those associates, if you pay the cost, you can add them to your hand. Well, getting those right-hand men into your hand is also doable just by spending 2 alcohol, except they all cost 2 alcohol, unlike the associates, which have different costs of 1 or 2 depending on their level. Now, there's multiple different benefits you're going to see by going down this track. Some of these spots are empty. Some of them are going to give you additional benefits, such as gaining different amounts of money, adding more of your right-hand men, and basically you're going to follow this track. And again, anytime you get that benefit, you're simply going to go ahead and follow whatever that benefit is as your boss goes through this track all the way up. Once your boss gets to the final level, you're going to see the amount of stats that they have that's going to be available on their boss card every time you play the boss card. So again, you're getting multiple benefits every time you level up your gang. Your boss card is getting more powerful, and your gang itself is also getting more powerful. It's going to cover all these different things that we gain once we get certain levels on all these different skills. The hand size one should be pretty self-explanatory. This means that anytime you drop your hand size, that's going to be your new maximum hand size. Now, the number on the far left is what you start with at the beginning of the game. When you go up to level 2, you're going to gain the next level. Go up to level 3, again, you're going to gain that level itself. So we see the hand size is 3, 4, and 5. Pretty darn self-explanatory there. The next level we're going to see is going to be the lawyer's level. Now, the lawyer's level denotes how many of our thugs we're going to pull back from the prison every time we do the reorganization ability. So we see that in this example, Stephanie St. Clair, she hasn't leveled up her skill. Anytime she does a reorganization, if she happens to have any of her thugs in her prison, she gets to pull 1 back. But if she happens to level up her skill high enough, she can pull back 3 from the prison every time she does a reorganization ability. And again, those thugs are going to go directly back into headquarters, meaning they're available to use on future turns. Next up, we're going to see is going to be the recruiters. Recruiters also goes along with reorganization, which basically means every time you take the reorganization action, that's the amount of your thugs you're going to slide along the track here. Remember, your track goes from the slums to the safe houses, all the way to the headquarters itself. And that's how many movements you get to take for your thugs. And again, the same thug can take multiple movements. So if we happen to have a recruiters here at level 2, that gives us 2 recruit actions. I can take 1 recruit action and a 2nd recruit action, put that thug in the headquarters, and you got it. They're ready to be used on future turns. Next up, we have the dealer supply, and this is going to add a bonus every time you take the dealer's action. Now remember, the dealer's action happens to be an action that is currently associated with the other actions, which means it's not associated actually with any of the actions on the board when we're looking at the underworld and the authority. So you don't have to actually use one of your thugs on the board. You're actually going to take that thug, put him on top of the deal that you're trying to make deals with, and then you're going to go ahead and get those benefits. What this ability does, though, is you're going to get extra resources based on the amount of skill you have in this ability. And you're going to pick 1 or 2, depending on what level your skill is, and you're going to gain that many extra resources from every single deal. And that's a bonus for every single deal you take with the dealers, and you pick the resources. It can be guns or alcohol, your choice every time you take those deals. The next action we're going to see is vehicles. Notice that starts with number 1. You got it. The reason why it does that is because at the start of the game, you started with a vehicle in play. But if you want to get more vehicles in play, you need to level up the skill, gaining extra vehicles. And the vehicle you're going to add in play is going to be your choice. It's going to be a car or a truck. You're simply going to take the vehicle when you level up that skill, and you're going to place it on the board in one of the districts you currently have presence. You have to have presence there. There haven't been any police officers in that location. Even though you have presence there, you are still going to have to pay a bribery to move that car or that truck in that section. And you have to pay that for every police officer. So for example, if you were to level up this skill right here for vehicles, and then you were supposed to, or chose to, get a truck and add it to the board, you would have to add this truck in a location where you currently have presence. And we see in this case, we only have presence in this location. Let's say somehow we manage to have presence over here, and there happen to be 2 police officers right here. We will level up that skill, and then we take that truck and we add it into the section right here. Then we have to spend $4 for the bribery, 2 for every police officer that happens to be in that section. Luckily, this thug would, in this case, give us presence in that district, allows us the ability to go into that section. And then the final ability is the ability for nightclubs. Now you get 2 nightclubs total in the game, and the interesting thing about nightclubs is while you may gain nightclubs, you don't always keep track of them, or I should say you don't always stay in control of them, because you can lose your nightclubs to other players. Nightclubs are very powerful. They give you lots of extra resources, but if a player steals them from you, you don't get another freebie somewhere out on the board. The nightclub ability allows you to add a nightclub onto the board, but doesn't guarantee you're going to stay in control of it. So when you take the nightclub action, you're simply going to take a neighborhood out there on the board, and you're simply going to flip that neighborhood over to its backside. Anything that happens to be on it, such as control markers and resources that happen to be on it, are going to stay on the neighborhood, and it's going to stay on its night side for the rest of the game. And I do mean for the rest of the game. And that means that if another player goes out there, manages to steal this neighborhood from you and gain control of it, it's not going to flip back to its day side. Once it's a neighborhood on its night side, it stays there permanently for the rest of the game. The nice thing about this, though, is when you do gain a neighborhood, you get to add a nightclub onto the neighborhood itself. And this allows you to get that 4th business onto that neighborhood. And the nice thing about this is this could be end-game victory points. It's also going to be money every time you do a reorganization. And we mentioned reorganizations more than enough times. Let's go ahead and explain how to do a reorganization turn. Don't forget, you have to do a reorganization if you have no cards in your hand and no cards in your drop pile. But the very first thing you're going to check for is to see if you have that ring. So if you have the ring at the start of the reorganization phase, just go ahead and take a certain amount of money based on the player count -1. So on a 4-player game, you gain $3. 2-player game, you're going to gain $1 only. Don't forget, might as well cover this right now. Again, I'm going to cover the full solo AI rules in a different video. But the AI rules is an actual player, which means if you're adding the AI into a multiplayer game, they do count as a player. So if you have 3 humans and 1 AI, that is still a 4-player game, and you will still get $3 for controlling the ring at the start of your turn. After you check for the benefits of having the ring, whether you do or you don't have it, and you gain the benefits for controlling it, the next thing you get to do is you get to sell in all the neighborhoods where you currently control. Now there's going to be just like a standard sell that you would take from doing the sell action if you would just sent one of your thugs into the underworld to do a sale action in a neighborhood. It works just exactly like that. You're going to sell resources that you may have in the neighborhood, sell resources that you may have currently on your deals, and you can use those to complete deals and go ahead and get the money from doing so. And much like your standard sale action, any trucks are going to give you the benefits they normally would give you, and any police officers will also need to be bribed. Don't forget to do that. This is a totally just exactly like a normal selling action. Next thing, now you're going to go ahead and gain $3 for every single neighborhood you control for every business that currently is on top of that neighborhood. So let's go ahead and give the Black Wolves gang a little bit more control so we can go ahead and show you exactly how this would work out. You're going to look at the total amount of neighborhoods you control, and every one of those neighborhoods has at least one business on it. For every single business out there on the board that you control in a neighborhood, you're going to go ahead and gain $3. So in this example, we have one business here, two here, and one more here for a total of 4 businesses. That's going to go ahead and give us $12 total. The maximum amount you can ever get, don't forget, is the amount of 4 businesses on every single neighborhood. So the absolute maximum that any single neighborhood can give you is 12. But you do see if you manage to build up 3 neighborhoods, that could be potentially $36, $48, or heck, even $60 if other players are foolish enough to let you gain that much control and earn that much money during every one of your reorganization phases. Next up, we now get the chance to retrieve all the thugs we may currently have on the board. We're going to retrieve any thugs from any business deals that we may have taken. That's generally 1 thug per deal. So we take that thug and you're going to put them back on your headquarters. Next, you're going to look to see if you have any thugs that happen to be on any jobs, and then you're looking to see if you have any thugs who happen to be on any of the authorities. If they happen to be on any jobs or any of the authorities, they're also going to be removed from those locations and put back in your headquarters. Next up, you're going to go ahead and look at the prison, and you're going to remove as many thugs from the prison as your current level of your lawyers. Now that usually starts with 1, but as you upgrade your lawyer level, that can go all the way up to 3 that you're going to gain back. And you're going to take that many back from your prison, and those also are going to go back into your headquarters, available for use on future turns. Now we get to go ahead and use our recruitment skill on our gang board, and we're going to look at our total recruitment skill level on our gang board. And like I said earlier, we're going to use that to go ahead and advance our thugs on our thug board. Simply look at your current recruitment level, and that's how many thugs you get to advance. So in this case, for Stephanie St. Clair, we see that she has a level 2 skill in recruitment that allows her to move 2 of her thugs in the recruitment hall. So we can basically go 1, 2 if we like, or we can do something different such as 1 and 2, which in my opinion is probably not the best idea. Probably the first suggestion I showed you would be the best way to do it. Again, your total recruitment is the total amount of movements you get to do on your thug board, moving them from the lower levels all the way out to the headquarters in an effort to get them available to use on future turns. After this, you're simply going to take your entire discard pile, and at this point, you're going to take your entire discard pile and you're going to shuffle your discard pile, and then you're going to go ahead and draw a brand new hand of cards based on your current hand size. After all that is finished, you're just going to go ahead and advance the time marker 1 space closer into the extra space. If it's not in the extra space, you don't need to worry about anything, but if it does move into the extra space, or it happens to be in that space at the end of a reorganization phase, then you're going to go ahead and carry out an extra phase. Now, I don't want to describe the extra phase yet because we're still in the current turn order of how things work. Remember, the way this was going to work out at the start of your turn, you're going to look at your hand. If you have any cards in your hand or in your draw pile, you have to take an action turn. If you don't have any cards in your hand or your draw pile, then you're forced to take a reorganization turn. After that point, whether it's reorganization or action turn, then we're going to go on to the 3rd phase of every single player's turn, which is drawing a new hand of cards based on your current hand size, and then you're going to go ahead and pass the player order on to the next player. One very important thing to understand about this game is that you never shuffle your discard pile unless you do a reorganization phase. As you're going through your hand of cards and you're constantly using your cards and discarding them after they've been used for various different actions all across the board, those cards are going to go into your discard pile. Again, you don't get them back, you don't shuffle your discard pile until you do reorganization phase. Even if you need to draw cards and you don't have enough cards in your draw pile because you're taking an action turn, even if that happens, you still do not shuffle your discard pile. That only happens during that reorganization phase. Hope that makes perfect sense to you. Now let's go ahead and explain how that extra phase occurs. And again, that only occurs during a reorganization phase if the time marker happens to be on the extra phase at the end of a reorganization phase. Has to be that reorganization phase, otherwise the extra does not occur. The very first thing you do when that token is on the extra phase during the reorganization phase is you're going to carry out a raid. Now I've already explained how to carry out a raid and how we take a raid card, how the Elliott Ness figure is going to move, and how all those things happen. So go ahead and tune back in the earlier parts of the video to understand how a raid occurs. But once the raid has occurred, we're simply going to increase the Elliott Ness level on the track. Now remember, Elliott Ness cannot be in the same space as another player's crime level. If it happens to be so, they will bump the crime level up, and Elliott Ness's max level happens to be level 6. So if he keeps moving up, he will keep bumping up the players ahead of him, making sure that their crime levels are never on his level or below his crime level. Elliott Ness keeps on marching on with his wonderful organization of the feds, trying to stop all the crime bosses from committing all their crimes. After you advance Elliott Ness, the next thing we are going to do is we are going to refresh the associate market. Now the associate market on the right hand side, you're going to notice that there's a little trash can symbol as a nice reminder here. It's basically going to tell you that you're going to take the last card in every one of the 4 to 6 and the last card in the 1 to 3 section, put it on the bottom of the respective decks. Then you're going to advance all the remaining cards to the right. And then you're simply going to draw new cards to go ahead and insert a new pile of associate cards. Make sure the associate deck is always constantly evolving for all the players, so there's no stagnation there. Nice little thing they added to the game. Finally, the only thing left to do is go ahead and return the tracking marker for the player turns all the way back to the current player count. Playing a 1 to 2 player game goes here, 3 player game, and a 4 player game here. And then we're going to continue on with the next player in player order. And yes, the next player order could do a reorganization phase, which could keep advancing this, and you could have multiple reorganization phases in a row, which means that eventually you could get extras kind of coming close to back to back. It's not broken, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just the way the game can play depending on how the players are taking their actions every single turn. Now, I've already said this multiple times, but just to go ahead and finish things out right here, just to make sure we have everything kind of organized all nice and well. Every time the extra goes here, we are going to make sure that we reveal the next extra card. And that's going to be a permanent effect that happens to be an effect. And then we're going to keep revealing these every single time there is an extra until we reveal the final extra card, which tells you Prohibition has ended. And that's going to bring about the end game itself. And if it ever matters for any cards that happen to be in play, the extra card is going to be revealed after the associate market is refreshed. I apologize, I missed that a little bit earlier, but just want to make sure I clarify right now that after you refresh the associate deck, during the extra phase, that's when you're going to reveal the newest news card, flip it over into the current news deck. Make sure you do that, and then you're going to go ahead and refresh everything else. At the end of the game, of course, like I mentioned earlier, all the players are going to add up the total amount of money they happen to have in their empire. From there, they're going to go ahead and gain extra money based on how many of these businesses they have control of at the end of the game. They're going to get $2 for every single star on all the associates they manage to add into their empire. They may get extra money from any of the cards they happen to play, and whoever has the most amount of money is going to be the grand winner of the game. Of course, don't forget the tiebreaker is the amount of actual cash you have behind your shield. There's still a tie at that point. Well, the players who are tying get to share equal victory in between themselves. Now, those are the big rules for the game of Scarface 1920. Now, there's just a couple golden rules you need to understand when you play the game of Scarface 1920. And most of these golden rules are pretty standard for any kind of these deck building and area control games. Of course, the big one that's very common for any game that has deck building of any kind in it is that the cards always trump the rules for the game. So if any card says to do something and it counteracts anything with the rule book, you know the card is going to take precedence here because that's just how these games work. Next up, if there happens to be any kind of card in the game that has a mandatory effect and it tells you that you have to do something, you have to do as much of that thing as you possibly can. For example, if a card tells you must discard $10, you only have $9, you can't ignore that effect. You discard as much as you can to make as many of the requirements as you can meet for any card that says you have to do something. Now, there are cards in the game that do say may, and any of those cards you may do the portions that say may on them. And if you don't want to do them, you don't have to do them at all. Now, of course, requirements for all the cards must be met anytime you want to put a card into play. You can't just pay a halfway point, and that's very much important for the job cards. If you can't meet all the requirements for a job card, you can't quite put that job card into play. All the components for the game are limited except for the components of the money, the alcohol, and the guns. Everything else is limited by what comes with the game itself. And finally, don't forget that all money must be hidden behind a shield. You're not allowed to tell the other players the amount of money you have behind the shield. It's something that must be hidden from all the other players. And the final golden rule for this game is that if there's any time there's an action that must occur simultaneously between multiple players, if those two players or multiple players cannot decide what order it should occur in, it's going to occur in player order starting with the current player who has a current action turn for themselves. Those are all the golden rules for the game itself. There's also a couple of variants for the game. I'm actually not going to cover them because this video's got way too long, and I think during the first playthrough you probably want to ignore them anyways. They're basically going to allow you to take different cards in your starting deck, and they're going to allow you to go ahead and do a draft for the job cards themselves. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this video series. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I'll do my best to get to them as quickly as I can. Also, feel free to email me at off-the-shelf-board-game-reviews. That is otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll do my best to answer those emails as quick as I can. If you enjoy the content and the videos I put out there, think about supporting the channel on Patreon. Just $1 in tip jar is a great way to say thanks. Also, clicking those two buttons down below is a painless and very free way to help support the channel. Click the like button, click the subscribe button, and the YouTube analytics will do the rest. Don't forget, like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.